Welcome to another video. There was a very specific kind of movie star that only existed in the 80s and 90s. Not the algorithm-optimized, social media-managed version of fame we know today, but something raw, a jawline on a movie poster that could sell out a theater on opening weekend before a single review was even published. These men weren't just actors. They were cultural events. Teenagers had their posters taped to bedroom walls. Magazines fought for exclusive photo shoots. And for a solid 20 years, a handful of faces basically defined what Hollywood leading men were supposed to look like. But here's what's fascinating. Almost none of their stories ended the way you'd expect. Some of them are still headlining blockbusters in 2026, looking barely different from their glory days. A few walked away from fame entirely and built completely different lives. One of the most beloved names on this list is sadly no longer with us. And at least one of these men went through a public fall from grace so dramatic it nearly erased everything he'd built. In this video, we're counting down 15 of the most iconic, most photographed, most poster-worthy leading men of the 80s and 90s, and exactly where every single one of them is today. Stick around until the end, because a couple of these transformations are going to genuinely surprise you. Let's start with the man who basically defined the word movie star for an entire generation. 1. Tom Cruise. If there's one face that defines this entire era, it's Tom Cruise. From the moment he sprinted across the screen in his underwear and socks in 1983, Cruise became something Hollywood hadn't fully seen before, a genuine teen heartthrob who could also carry a serious box office franchise on his own name alone. Few people know just how deliberately Cruise built his early career, reportedly turning down major franchise opportunities in the early 80s because he felt the scripts weren't strong enough, a level of career control almost unheard of for an actor still in his early 20s at the time. However, that's only part of the story. By the mid to late 80s, Cruise had become the single biggest box office draw in the world, headlining a string of films that didn't just succeed, they became generational touchstones. His performance opposite a legendary co-star in a Vietnam-era drama later earned him his first Academy Award nomination, proving early skeptics wrong who assumed his commercial appeal would never translate into serious critical respect. What happened next surprised even longtime industry insiders. Rather than coasting on his 80s and 90s fame the way many leading men eventually did, Cruise doubled down on physical, practical stunt work as he aged, famously performing his own increasingly dangerous sequences well into his 60s, a decision that's kept him relevant to audiences decades younger than his original 80s fanbase. Unfortunately, Cruise's personal life became just as publicly scrutinized as his career, with a series of highly publicized relationships and controversies throughout the 2000s that briefly affected his public image and box office reliability. Looking back, industry analysts widely point to that period as one of the most dramatic image rebuilding efforts any A-list star has ever successfully pulled off. Now 2026, Cruise remains one of the very few 80s leading men still headlining massive, billion-dollar theatrical franchises today, having successfully avoided the transition into supporting or character actor roles that most of his peers eventually made. At an age when most stars of his generation have long since slowed down, Cruise is still doing his own aerial stunts, arguably making him the most successfully renegade star on this entire list. 2. Patrick Swayze. Few actors captured the exact heartthrob energy of the late 80s quite like Patrick Swayze. Trained as a dancer long before he became an actor, Swayze brought a physical grace to the screen that few of his contemporaries could match, something audiences noticed immediately once he landed his first major romantic lead role. Few people know Swayze actually trained extensively in ballet from a young age, a background that made him uniquely suited for the dance sequences that would eventually define his most famous role, one built almost entirely around chemistry and choreography rather than dialogue alone. That single film became one of the highest-grossing movies of its year and turned Swayze into an overnight global sex symbol, a title that reportedly made him privately uncomfortable given his more serious ambitions as an actor. However, that's only part of the story. Just a year later, Swayze took on an entirely different kind of role in a supernatural romance that became one of the defining films of the following decade, proving his appeal went well beyond dance sequences and shirtless scenes, into genuine dramatic range that critics increasingly took seriously. Unfortunately, Swayze's story took a heartbreaking turn in 2008, when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Rather than retreating from public life, he chose to continue working and speaking openly about his diagnosis, an act many fans and colleagues described as remarkably brave given the severity of his illness. He passed away in 2009, a loss that devastated fans who had grown up idolizing him throughout the late 80s and 90s. Now 2026, Swayze never got the chance to grow old the way most names on this list did, but his films remain some of the most beloved and frequently rewatched of the entire era. Nearly 2 decades after his passing, he's still regularly cited by both fans and film historians as one of the defining leading men of his generation, and his charitable foundation continues cancer research work in his name today. 3. Mel Gibson. By the early 80s, Mel Gibson had already built a devoted following overseas before American audiences fully caught on, thanks to a gritty Australian action franchise that showcased both his intensity and his undeniable screen presence. Few people know Gibson was actually a fairly reluctant, shy performer early in his career, something that contrasted sharply with the fearless, larger-than-life characters he became famous for playing. However, that's only part of the story. Once American studios recognized his crossover appeal, Gibson quickly became one of the biggest box office draws of the late 80s and 90s, headlining a hugely successful buddy cop franchise that combined action with genuine comedic chemistry, a combination that helped define an entire genre of 80s and 90s filmmaking. What happened next surprised many who saw Gibson purely as an action star. He transitioned into directing in the 90s, eventually winning multiple Academy Awards, including Best Director, for a historical epic he both starred in and directed, cementing him as one of the most successful actor-director hybrids of his generation. Unfortunately, Gibson's career took a severe public downturn in the mid-2000s following a series of highly publicized personal controversies that led to widespread industry backlash and years of professional fallout. Looking back, it remains one of the most dramatic falls from a list status in modern Hollywood history, a stark contrast to the beloved, box office-dominating star he'd been throughout the 80s and 90s. Now 2026, in more recent years, Gibson has gradually returned to both acting and directing, taking on smaller projects and select high-profile roles as part of what industry observers describe as an ongoing, still complicated comeback. He remains one of the most talented, and most controversial, names to emerge from this entire era of leading men. 4. Rob Lowe. Few faces are more directly associated with the term Brat Pack than Rob Lowe. Throughout the mid to late 80s, Lowe became one of the most photographed young actors in the world, appearing in a string of coming-of-age films alongside a tight-knit group of young stars that defined an entire subgenre of 80s cinema. Few people know just how much pressure came with being labeled the group's most conventionally handsome member. Lowe has spoken candidly in later interviews about how that reputation, while flattering, often overshadowed his actual acting work during that period, making it difficult for critics and casting directors to take him seriously for more substantial dramatic roles. However, that's only part of the story. A personal scandal in the late 80s significantly damaged Lowe's career momentum for several years, a period he's since discussed openly as one of the most difficult and humbling stretches of his professional life. What happened next surprised many industry observers. Rather than fading away, Lowe rebuilt his career steadily through television in the 90s and 2000s, taking on a string of critically respected ensemble roles that reintroduced him to audiences as a genuinely skilled character actor rather than simply a teen idol. Now 2026, Lowe has aged into one of the more self-aware, good-humored figures from this era, frequently joking about his own Brat Pack heartthrob reputation on his own podcast and in interviews. Today, he remains a steady, respected working actor, having successfully navigated the transition from teen pinup to veteran television star more gracefully than many of his 80s peers. 5. Johnny Depp. Long before he became known for eccentric, heavily costumed character roles, Johnny Depp spent the late 80s as a reluctant teen idol thanks to a hit television crime drama that made him a household name almost overnight. Few people know just how uncomfortable Depp reportedly was with that level of fame early on, later describing in interviews how being marketed primarily as a pretty face for teenage magazines clashed sharply with his own artistic ambitions as an actor. However, that's only part of the story. Depp deliberately used his early television paycheck and fame as leverage to pursue far riskier, more unconventional film roles throughout the early 90s, working repeatedly with an idiosyncratic director whose collaboration would come to define much of Depp's most acclaimed work, including a role playing a gentle, scissor-handed outsider that became one of the most iconic images of 90s cinema. What happened next surprised many who expected Depp to fade after his teen idol years faded. Instead, he built one of the most genre-spanning careers of his generation, moving fluidly between independent art films and, eventually, one of the biggest blockbuster franchises of the 2000s, a swashbuckling pirate role that earned him an Academy Award nomination and redefined him yet again for an entirely new generation of fans. Unfortunately, Depp's career and public image took a severe hit in the late 2010s and early 2020s amid a highly publicized and lengthy legal battle involving his personal life, a period that led to significant professional fallout, including being removed from a major franchise role. Now 2026, in more recent years, Depp has continued a gradual return to film work, including international productions and directing projects, alongside a genuinely respected parallel career as a musician. His journey from teen heartthrob to art house favorite to blockbuster icon to controversial figure remains one of the most complex arcs of anyone on this list. 6. Denzel Washington. While several names on this list built their fame primarily through teen idol appeal, Denzel Washington's rise throughout the 80s and 90s was built almost entirely on consistent, critically acclaimed performances that steadily established him as one of the most respected actors of his generation. Handsome leading man status included almost as a side effect of sheer talent. Few people know Washington actually got his start in television medical dramas in the early 80s before transitioning into film, slowly building a reputation among directors as an actor capable of carrying both prestige historical dramas and mainstream action films with equal conviction. His performance in a Civil War-era historical drama earned him his first Academy Award in the early 90s, cementing him as one of the most bankable serious dramatic actors of the decade. However, that's only part of the story. Washington deliberately balanced acclaimed dramatic work with genuinely popular action and thriller roles throughout the 90s, a combination that made him almost uniquely positioned among his peers, respected by critics while also remaining one of the most reliable box office draws of the era. Looking back, Washington's approach to his own career, prioritizing longevity and consistent quality over chasing tabloid-level fame, has been widely credited by industry analysts as one of the key reasons his career has aged so much more gracefully than many of the more heavily tabloid-covered names from the same era. Now 2026, Washington remains one of the most active, acclaimed working actors from this entire era, still headlining major theatrical releases and earning award nominations well into his 70s. Of everyone on this list, he's frequently cited as the clearest example of an 80s and 90s leading man who successfully built a career on talent and consistency rather than image alone. 7. Kevin Costner. By the mid to late 80s, Kevin Costner had become one of Hollywood's most reliable and versatile leading men, equally comfortable headlining baseball dramas, gritty crime thrillers, and sweeping historical epics. Few people know Costner actually struggled through years of small, largely unnoticed roles before his breakout, including reportedly having his role entirely cut from a major ensemble drama early in his career, a rejection he's since described as one of the most painful moments of his early professional life. However, that's only part of the story. Costner's fortunes changed dramatically by the end of the decade, and by the early 90s he'd become one of the biggest names in the industry, both in front of and behind the camera. His ambitious directorial debut, an epic frontier drama he also starred in, became a massive critical and commercial success, earning him the Academy Award for Best Director and instantly establishing him as one of the few true actor-director hybrids of his generation. What happened next surprised many industry observers. Rather than continuing to dominate, Costner experienced a significant career downturn in the mid to late 90s following a string of expensive, poorly received projects, a stretch that led to years of more limited leading man opportunities compared to his early decade peak. Looking back, Costner has spoken candidly about that difficult period, framing it as a necessary, humbling stretch that ultimately made him more selective and grounded in the projects he chose afterward. Now 2026, Costner experienced a significant career resurgence in more recent years through a major television western that introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans, alongside continued work directing ambitious frontier epics of his own. Today, he remains one of the more successfully rebounded leading men from this era, having weathered a genuine mid-career slump and come back stronger. 8. Richard Gere. Few actors defined the term leading man throughout the late 70s into the 80s and 90s quite as consistently as Richard Gere. Beginning with a string of intense, critically discussed dramatic roles in the late 70s, Gere quickly established himself as one of the era's most magnetic on-screen presences, a reputation that only grew once he headlined one of the most successful romantic films of the early 90s. Few people know Gere was reportedly not the studio's first choice for that career-defining romantic comedy role, with the part having been offered to and turned down by several other major stars before it eventually landed with him, a decision that ended up cementing one of the most iconic on-screen partnerships of the decade. However, that's only part of the story. Beyond his romantic lead reputation, Gere built a genuinely diverse filmography throughout the 90s, taking on political thrillers, legal dramas, and eventually a return to his musical theater roots in a stylish crime musical that earned him a Golden Globe and significant critical acclaim well into the 2000s. Looking back, Gere has also become known throughout his career for his outspoken humanitarian and political activism, a public persona that sometimes overshadowed his acting work but has also earned him respect well beyond the entertainment industry itself. Now 2026, Gere continues acting selectively today, taking on smaller, more personal film projects rather than chasing blockbuster leading roles. Having successfully avoided being permanently defined by any single decade of his career, he remains one of the more gracefully aged and consistently respected names on this list. 9. Tom Hanks. By the mid-80s, Tom Hanks had already built a reputation as a gifted comedic actor, but few people expected the sheer range he'd eventually display across the following 2 decades. His breakout comedic role in the mid-80s, playing a man magically transformed into a child trapped in an adult's body, showcased a rare combination of boyish charm and genuine emotional depth that instantly set him apart from other comedic leading men of the era. Few people know Hanks actually spent years working in relatively unremarkable television and film roles throughout the early 80s before that single breakout performance changed everything, a slow build that gave him a level of grounded, workmanlike professionalism that colleagues have consistently praised throughout his career. However, that's only part of the story. By the early 90s, Hanks made a deliberate pivot towards serious dramatic material, taking on a groundbreaking role portraying a lawyer with AIDS, a performance that earned him his first Academy Award and was widely credited with helping shift mainstream Hollywood's approach to the subject. He followed it up the very next year with an even bigger critical and commercial triumph, an unconventional historical drama that became one of the highest-grossing films of the decade and earned him a second consecutive Academy Award, a feat only a small handful of actors in history have ever achieved. What happened next surprised absolutely no one who'd been paying attention. Hanks spent the following decades becoming arguably the most consistently trusted and beloved leading man in modern American cinema, taking on everything from space mission dramas to war epics to voice work in one of the most successful animated franchises ever made. Now 2026, Hanks remains one of the most active and respected actors from this entire era, still headlining major theatrical and streaming projects well into his late 60s. Of every name on this list, he's perhaps the clearest example of a handsome young leading man whose talent and likability ultimately outlasted and outgrew his looks-based early appeal entirely. 10. Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt's rise to fame in the early 90s happened almost overnight, thanks to a brief but unforgettable supporting role in a road trip drama that instantly made him one of the most talked about new faces in Hollywood. Few people know that role was relatively small in terms of screen time, yet Pitt's charisma was so immediately apparent that it launched him directly into leading man consideration practically overnight. However, that's only part of the story. Pitt deliberately avoided being typecast purely as a heartthrob throughout the 90s, taking on increasingly unconventional and physically transformative roles, including a mentally disturbed cult leader in a psychological thriller and an unhinged anarchist figure in a film that became one of the most culturally influential movies of the decade, despite performing relatively modestly at the box office upon its initial release. What happened next surprised many who assumed Pitt would eventually settle into more comfortable, conventional leading man roles as he aged. Instead, he continued pushing toward riskier, more transformative work throughout the 2000s and beyond, eventually earning his first competitive Academy Award for a supporting role in a Quentin Tarantino film decades into his career, a rare feat for an actor already considered a bona fide 90s heartthrob icon. Looking back, Pitt has also built a significant, well-respected career as a producer, with his production company backing several critically acclaimed and award-winning films over the following decades, adding an entirely different dimension to his industry legacy beyond acting alone. Now 2026, Pitt remains one of the most consistently working and critically respected actors from this era, having successfully transitioned from teen magazine heartthrob to serious, award-winning actor-producer without ever fully losing his leading man box office appeal. Few names on this list have aged into greater industry respect than his. 11. Keanu Reeves. Few actors on this list have experienced quite as dramatic a public image shift as Keanu Reeves. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Reeves built his reputation on a string of light-hearted comedic roles and intense action films, showcasing an easygoing, unassuming charm that made him instantly likable to audiences without ever feeling like a typical calculated Hollywood heartthrob. Few people know Reeves actually performed a significant amount of his own stunt work even in his earliest action roles, an early sign of the physical dedication that would eventually define one of the most acclaimed action franchises of his later career. His breakout action role in the mid-90s, playing a cop defusing a bomb on a speeding bus, became one of the defining action films of the decade and cemented him as a legitimate action star well beyond his earlier comedic reputation. However, that's only part of the story. By the late 90s, Reeves took on a role in a groundbreaking science fiction film that would go on to redefine the entire action genre technically and philosophically, becoming one of the most influential and frequently referenced films in modern cinema history. Unfortunately, Reeves has also experienced significant personal tragedy throughout his life, including the loss of close family members, struggles he's discussed with remarkable openness and grace in interviews over the years. Looking back, that openness, combined with numerous widely circulated stories of his genuine, understated kindness toward fans and crew members, has made Reeves one of the most universally beloved figures from this entire era, regardless of box office performance at any given moment. Now 2026, Reeves experienced a full-scale career resurgence in the 2010s through a stylish, critically acclaimed action franchise built specifically around his physical dedication and screen presence. Today, in his 60s, he remains one of the most beloved and respected action stars in the industry, having aged into a level of genuine public affection that few names on this list can match. 12. Harrison Ford. By the time the 80s began, Harrison Ford was already a global icon thanks to two of the most successful film franchises in movie history, but the decade that followed only deepened his status as arguably the single biggest action-adventure star in the world. Few people know Ford actually worked for years as a professional carpenter before his acting career fully took off, a grounded, blue-collar background that colleagues have often pointed to as part of what made his everyman charisma feel so genuine on screen. However, that's only part of the story. Throughout the 80s, Ford deliberately balanced his adventure franchise fame with more serious dramatic and romantic roles, including a critically acclaimed detective thriller and a tense courtroom-adjacent drama, proving he had far more range than simply cracking a whip or piloting a spaceship. What happened next surprised many industry observers who assumed Ford's box office dominance would eventually fade the way it did for many action stars of his generation. Instead, he continued headlining major franchise films well into the 90s and 2000s, and remarkably, returned to his most iconic adventure role decades later in his late 70s, performing much of his own physical work in a way few actors his age have ever attempted. Looking back, Ford has long been known throughout the industry for a notoriously private, media-averse personality, rarely engaging in the kind of tabloid culture that affected several other names on this list, a choice that's arguably helped preserve his reputation as one of the most respected and least controversial leading men of his era. Now 2026, Ford remains active in major franchise filmmaking even now, having recently taken on a significant role in one of the biggest superhero franchises in the industry well into his 80s. Of everyone on this list, his sheer career longevity, spanning 6 full decades of consistent leading and supporting roles, remains virtually unmatched. 13. Pierce Brosnan. Long before he became one of the most recognizable faces in the entire spy thriller genre, Pierce Brosnan spent much of the 80s building his reputation through a stylish television detective series that made him a household name, particularly among American audiences who hadn't yet seen his earlier work overseas. Few people know Brosnan was actually the studio's top choice for one of the most iconic action franchises in film history years before he finally got the role, only to have contractual obligations to his television series prevent him from accepting it at the time, a missed opportunity he since described as one of the more painful near misses of his early career. However, that's only part of the story. When the opportunity finally returned to him in the mid-90s, Brosnan didn't just accept the role, he redefined it for an entirely new generation of audiences, bringing a smoother, more emotionally layered take to one of cinema's most enduring characters. His debut film in the role became a massive critical and commercial success, instantly re-establishing the franchise as one of the biggest in the world after several years of relative decline. What happened next surprised many who expected Brosnan to be permanently defined by that single iconic role. Throughout his tenure, he deliberately took on projects outside the franchise as well, including romantic dramas and comedic roles, proving he had range well beyond tailored suits and gadget-filled action sequences. Unfortunately, Brosnan's time in the role eventually ended amid a well-documented and somewhat public disagreement over the franchise's creative direction and his own contract, a transition that many longtime fans still discuss and debate to this day regarding how it was handled. Looking back, Brosnan has spoken candidly in later interviews about both his gratitude for the role and the mixed feelings surrounding how his time with it ultimately concluded, offering a rare moment of honesty about an industry that rarely allows its biggest stars to admit disappointment. Now 2026, Brosnan has continued working steadily since, taking on a diverse range of film roles across drama, comedy, and even superhero franchise work in more recent years. Today, he's widely regarded as one of the most successful and stylish leading men of his generation, having left a lasting mark on one of cinema's most iconic characters despite the complicated ending to that particular chapter. 14. Antonio Banderas. Antonio Banderas arrived in Hollywood in the early 90s already an established star in his native Spain, having built a strong reputation working repeatedly with one of the country's most acclaimed directors. Few people know Banderas initially spoke very limited English when he first began pursuing American film roles, reportedly learning much of his early English language dialogue phonetically before gradually mastering the language more fully as his Hollywood career progressed. However, that's only part of the story. Banderas's American breakthrough came through a stylish vampire drama in the early 90s, immediately establishing him as one of the most striking and internationally intriguing new leading men in the industry. He followed that with a string of increasingly high-profile roles throughout the decade, including a stylish action thriller built specifically around his charisma and physicality, and a beloved musical-adjacent romantic role that further cemented his reputation as one of the most versatile and charming actors to cross over from international cinema. What happened next surprised many who assumed Banderas would remain confined primarily to romantic or action-oriented leading man roles. He continued expanding his range throughout the 2000s and beyond, eventually earning significant critical acclaim, including an Academy Award nomination decades into his career for a deeply personal, semi-autobiographical drama directed by his longtime early collaborator, proving his talent extended far beyond the charismatic screen presence that first made him famous. Looking back, Banderas has also become widely known and respected for successfully maintaining a career across both Spanish and English language cinema simultaneously, rarely fully abandoning his roots even as his Hollywood profile grew throughout the 90s and 2000s. Now 2026, Banderas remains one of the most respected and consistently working actors from this era, continuing to move fluidly between major international and Hollywood productions. Today, he's regarded as one of the clearest examples on this list of a 90s heartthrob whose long-term critical respect ultimately matched, and in some ways surpassed, his early reputation built primarily on charisma and looks. 15. Val Kilmer. Closing out this list is one of the most talented, and most complicated, leading men of the entire era. Val Kilmer's rise throughout the mid to late 80s established him as one of Hollywood's most intense and dedicated young actors, a reputation that only grew once he took on one of the most demanding physical and vocal transformations of the decade, portraying a legendary rock icon in a biographical drama that required Kilmer to essentially disappear entirely into the role for months of preparation. Few people know just how deep that preparation went. Kilmer reportedly spent well over a year studying his subject's mannerisms, voice, and stage presence so thoroughly that even close family members of the person he was portraying later remarked how eerily accurate the performance felt, a level of commitment that instantly established Kilmer as one of the most serious and technically gifted actors of his generation. However, that's only part of the story. Kilmer balanced that intense dramatic work with genuine blockbuster leading man appeal throughout the late 80s and 90s, headlining a high-flying military action drama and later taking on one of cinema's most iconic caped heroes, proving his range extended comfortably from serious character work to major franchise filmmaking. Unfortunately, Kilmer's reputation within the industry became increasingly complicated by the mid to late 90s, with widely reported stories about difficult on-set behavior affecting his standing for certain high-profile roles in the years that followed, a narrative Kilmer himself later pushed back against in various interviews, describing it as a more nuanced situation than the industry rumor mill portrayed at the time. What happened next surprised and moved fans deeply. In 2015, Kilmer was diagnosed with throat cancer, a battle that eventually affected his voice significantly, requiring him to use technology to help recreate his own speaking voice for later projects, including a poignant return to one of his most beloved franchise roles decades after his original performance. Fans and colleagues widely praised his courage in continuing to work and share his story despite the illness's visible toll. Kilmer passed away in 2025, and tributes poured in from across the industry, with colleagues and fans alike remembering both his extraordinary talent and the remarkable grace he showed throughout his final years. Now 2026, Val Kilmer's passing in 2025 marked the loss of one of the most technically gifted and fearless actors of his generation. His body of work, from full physical transformations to iconic blockbuster roles, remains widely studied and celebrated, and his final, deeply personal documentary and franchise return are now remembered as one of the most moving final chapters of any actor from this entire era. Looking back across all 15 of these names, what stands out isn't just how good-looking any of them were. It's how differently each of their stories actually turned out. Some of them are still headlining blockbusters decades later, having aged into even greater respect than they had in their prime. Others walked through public scandal and clawed their way back through sheer talent and persistence. A couple built quiet, dignified careers built on consistency rather than tabloid attention. And two of the most beloved names on this entire list aren't with us anymore, remembered forever exactly as fans first fell for them on screen. What ties all 15 of these stories together isn't a jawline or a magazine cover. It's the fact that being handsome got every single one of them through the door, but it was never actually what kept them there. The ones still working today, the ones respected by critics and audiences alike, the ones fans still root for decades later, all of them had to become far more than just a face on a poster to survive an industry that moves on from pretty faces every single year. And maybe that's the real story behind this entire list. Looks fade. Talent, resilience, and the willingness to keep showing up, that's what actually lasts. If one of these names brought back a memory, or if one of these, then versus now, transformations genuinely surprised you, let me know which one in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back at the leading men who defined the 80s and 90s, subscribe, because there are plenty more icons from this era still to cover.